Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. In the dusty corner of an estate auction in northern Vermont, a collection of porcelain dolls from 1914 emerged from a cedar chest that had remained sealed for decades. The collection, comprising 12 exquisitely crafted dolls, each wearing period-appropriate clothing from the pre-World War era, seemed innocuous at first glance. Their glass eyes gleamed under the auction house lights, their cheeks painted with a delicate blush that had somehow withstood the test of time. The dolls belonged to the Winthrop family, whose prominence in early 20th century Boston society was matched only by the mysterious circumstances of their decline. Elizabeth Winthrop, the family's youngest daughter, had received the dolls as gifts for her 8th birthday in 1914, mere months before the entire household succumbed to what newspapers of the time vaguely described as a sudden and grievous ailment. What drew our attention to this collection was not the dolls themselves, but a photograph that accompanied them. The sepia-toned image shows the dolls arranged in a semicircle on what appears to be Elizabeth's bed. The photograph is remarkably well preserved, capturing the dolls in all their pristine glory. Their painted smiles and rosy complexions give them a lifelike quality that borders on unsettling, but nothing about the image seems particularly sinister until examined more closely. It's in the details that the photograph reveals its macabre secret. When digitally enhanced and magnified, what appears to be simply the doll's hair reveals something far more disturbing. Each doll's carefully styled locks are not made of the typical horsehair or synthetic fibers used in doll manufacturing of the period. The texture and pattern visible under magnification suggests human hair, specifically, hair that matches descriptions of the Winthrop family members. The largest doll, wearing what appears to be a Mother's Day dress, has auburn hair arranged in a Gibson girl style, precisely matching the few surviving photographs of Mary Ann Winthrop. The doll, representing the father figure, sports the same distinguished salt and pepper hair as Thomas Winthrop. Most disturbing of all, the smallest doll, dressed in a child's nightgown, has the same golden curls that Elizabeth herself possessed. Historical records indicate that the Winthrop family had employed a doll maker who had emigrated from Eastern Europe, bringing with him techniques that were considered innovative for the time. What the records don't explain is why this craftsman disappeared immediately following the family's demise, or why he would have incorporated human hair into his creations without the family's knowledge. More unsettling still is the note found tucked behind the photograph, written in a child's unsteady hand. "They take a piece of you to keep forever. Mother says it makes the dolls love you back. I don't think they love us anymore." The Winthrop family dolls raised disturbing questions. In an era when hair jewelry and mementos were common remembrances of loved ones, what purpose did these dolls truly serve? And what connection might they have to the family's unexplained deaths just weeks after this photograph was taken? The auction house appraiser who first discovered the photograph contacted our team immediately. Victoria Hale, a textile conservator specializing in historical artifacts, was particularly troubled by the dolls' clothing, not just for the hair incorporated into their heads, but for anomalies in the fabric itself. The stitching contains patterns inconsistent with machine or standard hand sewing from the era, Victoria explained as she showed me the microscopic images. These irregular groupings of 5 stitches followed by 3 longer ones appear deliberately placed along the interior seams where they wouldn't be visible during normal handling. The pattern, when mapped across all 12 dolls, formed what linguistics professor Aaron Chambers identified as characters from a pre-Cyrillic script used in isolated Eastern European mountain communities. The rough translation: bound in cloth, bound in hair, bound in spirit. Further investigation into the doll maker revealed a name, Ferenc Kovács, who arrived in Boston in 1912 after fleeing his village near the Carpathian border. Immigration records show he claimed to be escaping persecution after local families blamed his dolls for a series of childhood illnesses. Thomas Winthrop, who served on the board of Massachusetts General Hospital, apparently took interest in Kovács after the immigrant crafted remarkable anatomical models for medical training. The Winthrop family physicians' journals, recently discovered in Harvard Medical School's archives, paint a troubling picture of the weeks following Elizabeth's birthday. The grievous ailment, referenced in newspapers, manifested as progressive paralysis, accompanied by heightened sensory awareness. The victims remained fully conscious as their autonomic functions gradually ceased. Most disturbing is the children's insistence that they can feel themselves being pulled toward their doll counterparts at night, wrote Dr. James Harrington on March 23, 1914. Young Elizabeth claims her doll whispers that the transfer is nearly complete. I have administered increased laudanum, though it provides little relief. Most chilling was our discovery in the county property records. The abandoned Winthrop summer home in Vermont where the dolls were discovered changed hands repeatedly over decades, with each family reporting at least one case of unexplained paralysis before selling the property at significant loss. The cedar chest containing the dolls remained in the attic throughout, apparently untouched until the most recent owners discovered it while preparing for the estate sale. Chemical analysis of hair samples from the dolls revealed trace amounts of a compound related to tetrodotoxin, a powerful neurotoxin that can induce paralysis while leaving victims conscious. More puzzling were microscopic amber crystalline structures embedded in the hair follicles, structures that, according to 3 independent laboratories, appear to be organic but match no known biological material. The current whereabouts of the 12 dolls remain unknown. Despite our documentation and the auction house's detailed records, the collection disappeared during transport to our research facility. The delivery driver was found in his vehicle 2 days later, unresponsive but alive, suffering from partial paralysis. His only coherent statement before being hospitalized: they didn't want to be separated again. The little girl said they were going home. The doll's disappearance triggered a multi-state investigation that quickly encountered bizarre complications. Police reports documented electronic equipment malfunctions whenever investigators approached locations where the dolls had supposedly been sighted. Detective Sandra Mercer, leading the case, discovered her case notes repeatedly altered overnight, childish drawings appearing in the margins of her notebooks, always depicting 12 figures arranged in a circle. Our research took an unexpected turn when Elizabeth Winthrop's personal diary surfaced at a literary memorabilia auction in Providence. The slim volume, its pages brittle with age, contained entries stopping abruptly 3 days before the family's affliction began. The final entry chilled me to the bone. Ference says my special dolls need more than hair to become true companions. Today he showed me how to feed them. A drop of blood from my finger made my doll's cheeks flush pink for a moment. Ference says each doll needs feeding every night for 9 nights. Mother and father don't know. It's our secret game. Cross-referencing this information with Eastern European folklore, Dr. Elena Vasquez, our cultural anthropologist, identified parallels to obscure Carpathian binding rituals designed to create guardian entities that would preserve a family's essence beyond death. These protectors were meant to consume the soul gradually, storing it within crafted vessels. The ritual was never meant for use on the living, Dr. Vasquez emphasized. In its original context, the binding occurred after death, preserving a piece of the departed's essence. Performing this ritual on living subjects would create a parasitic relationship, the vessels drawing life force continuously. A thermal imaging sweep of the Winthrop summer home revealed startling anomalies. Cold spots measuring well below ambient temperature formed a precise trail from the attic to the property boundary, disappearing into the adjacent forest. More disturbing were 12 distinct heat signatures in the attic where the cedar chest had been stored, visible only through specialized equipment. Human-shaped outlines approximately 3 feet tall, arranged in the same semicircle configuration as in the 1914 photograph. Meanwhile, reports of missing children's hair began emerging from communities along the apparent path of the doll's movement. In each case, parents reported finding locks of their children's hair precisely cut while the children slept, with small vintage porcelain dolls occasionally spotted sitting on windowsills outside these homes. Soil samples collected from the Winthrop family cemetery plot yielded another alarming discovery. The graves, particularly Elizabeth's, showed evidence of disturbance from below, not from grave robbery, but from something apparently pushing upward through the soil before subsiding. The most recent development came from an elderly hospice patient in western Massachusetts who claimed to have encountered the Winthrop girl and her doll friends in the 1950s when he was a child. His written testimony describes Elizabeth as looking exactly like her photograph, not a day older, accompanied by 11 dolls carried in a handcart. According to his account, she approached him while he played alone in the woods, asking if he would donate a small piece of himself so her friends could continue their journey home. She told me they were collecting just enough from many children, his statement reads, rather than taking everything from a few. She said they had learned restraint after what happened to her family. The Vermont Historical Society contacted our team last week with an unexpected development. Their archivist had discovered a series of glass plate negatives hidden within the false bottom of a donated steamer trunk. The trunk's provenance traced back to Elias Corvus, the only known apprentice of Ferenc Kovács. These newly developed images reveal Kovács's workshop in disturbing detail. One photograph shows 12 miniature chairs arranged in a circle around what appears to be a small altar. Each chair held tools specific to the Winthrop family members: Thomas's fountain pen, Marianne's embroidery scissors, Elizabeth's school primer. Most unsettling was the collection of small glass vials containing what the accompanying notes described as essence distillations, presumably the blood Elizabeth mentioned in her diary. The final negative in the series shows Kovács himself, standing beside the completed dolls. His expression is not of an artisan proud of his work, but rather that of a man who appears haunted by his creation. The image quality deteriorates around the edges, as if the photographic plate itself was damaged by what it captured. Dr. Catherine Shepard, our forensic pathologist, made a breakthrough when examining strands of hair recovered from the auction house display. Using advanced spectroscopic techniques, she identified organic compounds consistent with a rare metabolic disorder that causes accelerated aging. The Winthrop medical records mention symptoms consistent with progeria-like conditions developing in all family members, Dr. Shepard explained. But what's extraordinary is that the hair samples show evidence of the aging process reversing, not just halting. Something in the binding ritual was extracting youth itself. This theory gained credence when we tracked down nursing home records from 1972 describing an unidentified elderly woman found wandering near the former Winthrop property. The woman, estimated to be in her 90s, claimed to be 8 years old and kept asking for her doll friends. Her fingerprints matched those of Elizabeth Winthrop, taken from her childhood school records. Medical notes indicate she aged approximately 60 years in the 7 months before her death. Most disturbing are the sleep study results from 3 children who reported encounters with the dolls in the past year. Each child exhibits identical brainwave patterns during REM sleep, patterns that precisely match fragments of EEG readings taken from Elizabeth Winthrop during her hospitalization in 1914. The pattern suggests a consciousness distributed across multiple vessels, awakening incrementally as it gathers strength. Yesterday, I received an unmarked package containing a single porcelain finger, unmistakably from one of the Winthrop dolls. Attached was a child's drawing showing 12 figures now arranged in a spiral pattern, moving inward toward a central point marked with the coordinates of an abandoned mill 20 miles from the original Winthrop property. The careful handwriting below, in faded ink that chemical testing confirms is over a century old, contains just 5 words. We're finally ready to return. Our team departs for the coordinates tomorrow. Against all professional judgment, I've provided a strand of my own hair to our equipment technician with instructions to preserve it separately. Something tells me that before this investigation concludes, we may need to understand precisely what it means to become part of the Winthrop collection. The mill looms before us as twilight fades, its weathered brick facade punctuated by shattered windows that reflect the last crimson streaks of sunset. Our equipment malfunctioned half a mile back, forcing us to continue on foot through dense underbrush. Professor Vasquez leads our 5-person team, clutching a hand-drawn map recreated from Elizabeth's diary. The binding ritual requires a place where water and earth meet, she explains, voice hushed despite the isolation. Old mills served as liminal spaces in Carpathian folklore, thresholds between worlds. Inside, our flashlights reveal machinery frozen mid-decay, as though time itself has congealed around the rusted gears and broken belts. The air carries a peculiar scent, not the expected mildew and abandonment, but something sweeter, reminiscent of cedar and warm wax. Victoria notices it first, a perfect circle of dry floor amid water-damaged boards. 12 small indentations mark the circle's perimeter, equidistant and precisely sized to fit a doll's base. At the circle's center lies a child's hairbrush, its handle inlaid with mother-of-pearl, an exact match to one seen in Elizabeth Winthrop's lap in a family photograph from 1913. "Nobody touch anything," Detective Mercer warns, though her voice wavers. She's been experiencing progressive numbness in her extremities since we arrived, a symptom disturbingly similar to the Winthrop family's affliction. Dr. Shepard kneels to examine an unusual substance in the indentations. "It's fresh," she confirms. "The dolls were here within the last 24 hours. A sudden crash from above sends birds scattering from the rafters. We navigate a treacherous staircase to the mill's second floor. where an elaborate tableau awaits us. The 12 dolls sit arranged around a miniature reproduction of what appears to be the Winthrop family home, crafted from twigs, moss, and cloth scraps. The dolls themselves have changed. No longer pristine porcelain treasures, they've transformed into unsettling hybrids of doll and human characteristics. Their glass eyes now contain depth and movement. Their jointed fingers bear minute fingerprints. Their porcelain skin has taken on the translucent quality of human tissue. Most alarming is the doll representing Elizabeth. While the others face inward toward the miniature house, her head is turned directly toward our group, mouth slightly open as though interrupted mid-speech. A child's voice echoes through the mill, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. "You brought what I asked for." Detective Mercer collapses, clutching her throat. As we rush to her aid, Victoria makes a horrifying discovery. A 13th indentation has appeared in the circle downstairs, larger than the others. In Mercer's pocket, we find a small porcelain doll bearing her exact features, crudely but recognizably crafted, with a lock of her hair already wound around its head. The journal I've kept throughout this investigation begins to bleed ink across its pages, the words rearranging themselves before our eyes. My own handwriting transforms into the childish script we've seen before. Ference never told me the dolls would get so hungry. I tried to make them wait. I tried to take just a little from many, but they've waited too long for a complete family. They need a 13th to complete the circle, to finish what began in 1914. The temperature plummets as darkness falls. Through the mill's broken windows, we observe lights moving through the forest toward us. Small, flickering lights at child height, approaching in perfect synchronization from all directions. The mill transforms before our eyes as the approaching lights draw nearer. The floorboards beneath us shift and groan, not from our weight but as if awakening from a century-long slumber. Detective Mercer's breathing grows more labored, her eyes fixed on the crude doll bearing her likeness. "It's calling to me," she whispers through increasingly paralyzed lips. I can feel myself being pulled toward it. Professor Vasquez frantically flips through her notes, searching for any countermeasure to the binding ritual. "The original Carpathian texts mention a reversal," she says, voice strained. "The vessels can be severed from their connections, but only if." Her words are cut short as the miniature Winthrop house in the center of the doll circle erupts into flame, a tiny, perfect fire that burns without consuming the delicate structure. Through the windows of the model, we can see microscopic figures moving within, engaged in what appears to be the daily routines of a family from 1914. Dr. Shepard attempts to document this impossibility with her camera, but the screen shows only static. The binding isn't just physical, she realizes aloud. They've created a moment in time that never ended, a perpetual day when the family was still whole. The strand of my hair, sealed in its protective vial, begins to twist and coil of its own accord. Victoria notices it happening to her collected samples as well. They're resonating with whatever energy is gathering here, she observes, backing away from her equipment case. Outside, the approaching lights have formed a perfect ring around the mill. Through broken windows, we glimpse not the dolls we expected, but children, or childlike figures, each holding a candle, their faces bearing uncanny resemblances to the Winthrop family members. The temperature continues to drop until our breath crystallizes before us. Ice forms in intricate patterns across the floor, spreading from the circle of indentations upward along the walls. The patterns mirror the stitching Victoria identified on the doll's clothing, the pre-Cyrillic binding script forming a cage of frozen language around us. Ference thought he was helping them, comes a voice from the stairwell. A small figure stands there, not Elizabeth as we expected, but a boy of perhaps 10, dressed in clothes a century out of date. He promised the Winthrops their family would never be separated, even by death, but the ritual was incomplete when they began to die. The boy steps into the light, revealing a face half human, half porcelain, cracked along one cheek to expose clockwork mechanisms beneath. "I am Thomas Jr., the son they lost to influenza in 1912, before Ference came. They wanted me back most of all." He approaches Detective Mercer, kneeling beside her partially paralyzed form. The circle requires 13 because there were 13 Winthrops, including me. "Ference never made my doll because I was already gone, but Mother saved my hair." He touches Mercer's face with jointed fingers that move too smoothly. "We've been searching for someone suitable to complete our family, someone who understands what it means to investigate mysteries beyond the veil." The walls of the mill begin to shimmer, revealing glimpses of the Winthrop home as it stood in 1914, superimposed over our reality. The boundary between past and present thins as Thomas Jr. smiles, a mechanical approximation of childish delight. "They're not coming in," he says, gesturing to the lights outside. "You're going out, to join us in the moment that never ends." The child porcelain hybrid extends his clockwork hand toward us, fingers clicking softly with each movement. I find myself unable to retreat as the boundary between worlds continues to thin around us. Through the shimmering walls, I glimpse servants setting a table in the Winthrop dining room, their movements jerky and repetitive like film caught in an endless loop. "You've misunderstood," Professor Vasquez says suddenly, her voice steadier than it should be under these circumstances. "The 13th position isn't for Detective Mercer. Ferentz's ritual required 13, but the 13th was always meant to be him." Thomas Jr.'s mechanical smile falters, porcelain creaking at the edges. "The doll maker himself was the anchor," she continues, pulling a folded paper from her notes. "Look at the original circle formation. 12 vessels around a central point. Ferentz wasn't creating companions. He was building a tether to hold your family in this world. On the floor below, ice crystals spread from the indentations, forming not a circle but a spiral now, spinning inward toward an empty center point that seems to descend into infinite darkness. Dr. Shepard, who had been monitoring Mercer's vital signs, gasps as she notices something in the detective's clenched fist. Prying the fingers open reveals a tiny carved wooden figure, crude compared to the porcelain dolls but unmistakably meant to represent a man with Carpathian features. She found this hidden in the cedar chest. Dr. Shepard whispers, "The 13th doll was in the collection all along." Victoria approaches the miniature Winthrop house with measured steps. "The binding wasn't just to preserve the family," she says. Ferentz realized what was happening, how the ritual was consuming them instead of preserving their essence. He bound himself to the collection as a safeguard, to prevent complete transference. Thomas Jr.'s face contorts with a sound like breaking china. "Father said Ferentz abandoned us, that he fled when we needed him most. He didn't flee," I realize aloud, the pattern suddenly clear. "He sacrificed himself. The cedar chest wasn't meant to store the dolls, it was meant to contain them." The lights outside the mill grow brighter, pressing against windows and walls now translucent as rice paper. Through them, I see not children, but something between doll and human. 12 figures with porcelain limbs and glass eyes set in faces too alive to be artificial, yet too perfect to be human. "They're not complete," Victoria says, understanding dawning. "For a century they've existed in between, unable to fully cross over or return. Neither living nor dead." Thomas Jr. reaches for Mercer's doll again, but his hand passes through it like smoke. "We need to be whole," he pleads, his voice fragmenting into multiple childish tones, speaking in unison. "We need to be family again." The wooden figure in Mercer's hand begins to smolder, tiny spirals of smoke rising from its surface. The detective's paralysis visibly recedes as the figure burns hotter, though no flame appears. Through the walls of the Winthrop home superimposed over our reality, new figures appear, servants and household staff forgotten in the records, their forms indistinct but undeniably present. Beyond them, shadowy silhouettes of delivery boys, shop clerks, neighbors, dozens of connections the family had to the world beyond their privileged circle. "The ritual was never meant for 13, Professor Vasquez whispers. Ferentz knew the truth. A family isn't isolated. It exists within a community. The binding requires all connections to be acknowledged. The mill groans around us as past and present strain against their boundaries, the incomplete ritual seeking resolution after a century of suspension. The wooden figure in Mercer's hand begins to glow with an amber light, illuminating veins within her skin as her strength gradually returns. The light spreads through the mill, revealing previously invisible threads connecting each doll to the others, to us, and to countless unseen points beyond the walls. A vast web of relationships and interactions. The binding wasn't failing because it was incomplete, I say, understanding finally dawning. It was failing because it was selfish. Thomas Jr.'s mechanical features soften slightly as he watches the connections materialize around him. Father only wanted to save us, to keep us together. But you were never meant to be kept apart from the world, Victoria says gently, approaching the child doll hybrid. No family exists in isolation. Ferentz knew that a true binding acknowledges all connections, To everyone whose lives touched yours, however briefly. Outside, the ring of figures begins to change. Their porcelain rigidity gives way to more fluid, natural movement. Through the mill's windows, we glimpsed not just the Winthrop family members, but the mailman who delivered their letters, the gardener who tended their roses, the schoolteacher who praised Elizabeth's penmanship. Professor Vasquez carefully opens Elizabeth's diary to its final pages, ones we'd thought blank before. In the mill's strange light, text appears, written in Ferentz's cramped hand. The Winthrops believe I am building them vessels for preservation, but they have misunderstood the ancient ways. True preservation comes not from withdrawal, but from connection. I cannot stop what has begun, but I can ensure they are not trapped forever between states. When the 13th vessel joins with all who touched their lives, the circle will not close. It will open. The spiral pattern on the floor shifts again, its inward curve reversing to spiral outward instead. Detective Mercer rises to her feet, the paralysis fully receding as the wooden figure in her hand crumbles to ash that spirals upward, joining the threads of light. They weren't trying to take a 13th soul, Dr. Shepard realizes. They needed someone to complete the reversal, to acknowledge all the connections so they could finally move on. Thomas Jr. approaches the miniature house, gazing at the tiny figures inside with a mixture of longing and resignation. We thought we were preserving our family by keeping everyone else out, but that's what trapped us. The shimmering boundary between times grows more permeable as the 13 dolls, including the wooden figure now reconstituted as pure light, arrange themselves not in an isolating circle but in a formation that branches outward like a family tree, extending beyond the mill's walls toward the community beyond. It was never about binding them to earth or to vessels, I whisper, watching as Thomas Jr.'s porcelain features begin to soften into something more peaceful, more human. It was about acknowledging that even in death, we remained connected to everyone whose life we touched. The mill walls dissolve completely, revealing not darkness but a luminous landscape where the Winthrop home stands restored, yet transparent, its boundaries permeable as the family within prepares to finally complete their interrupted journey together, surrounded by the community that had always been part of their story. The mill's foundation trembles as the boundary between worlds continues to blur. The wooden beams above us creak and groan, shedding decades of dust that dances in the expanding web of amber light. As the connection threads multiply, they reveal new, unsettling dimensions to the Winthrop tragedy. Look at the pattern, Victoria whispers, tracing the luminous filaments with her fingertip without touching them. The connections aren't just spreading outward, they're creating echoes. She's right. Each thread pulses with memories, flickering images of lives touched by the Winthrop family, and, more disturbingly, by their dolls. I glimpse a nurse from 1918 watching her hair fall out in clumps after finding a porcelain figure on her windowsill. A librarian in 1943 discovering her circulation records rewritten in childish script overnight. A caretaker in 1977 waking, paralyzed, beside a small indentation in his pillow. They weren't just waiting, Dr. Shepard says, her voice hollow with realization. They were feeding. Each encounter sustained them through the decades. Thomas Jr.'s form flickers between solid and translucent as he reaches toward the expanding web. We didn't understand what we were doing, he says, his voice overlapping with other childish voices. We were so hungry for connection that we took instead of shared. Detective Mercer, now fully mobile, approaches the spiral pattern on the floor. The ash from the wooden figure is completing a new design, she observes, pointing to symbols forming in the dust. It's not Carpathian anymore. Professor Vasquez kneels despite the danger, studying the evolving script. This is much older, predates written language entirely. These are markers for transitions, not between life and death, but between isolated existence and connected being. The temperature in the mill fluctuates wildly, plunging cold one moment, stifling the next. Outside, the figures have formed a new arrangement, no longer surrounding the mill but creating pathways leading away from it in every direction. Their lights pulse in synchronization with our heartbeats. They're waiting for a decision, Thomas Jr. explains, his porcelain features now more human than manufactured. Ferentz's ritual offers two completions. We can finally pass beyond together, or we can remain connected to this world permanently. At what cost? I ask, instinctively clutching my notebook tighter. Thomas Jr.'s eyes, now more flesh than glass, fill with something between sorrow and hunger. Someone must remain as anchor. not trapped as we were, but bound to maintain the connection between worlds. The amber threads suddenly converge on the wooden figure's ashes, forming a new doll-sized shape on the floor. It has no distinct features, yet remains recognizable as a vessel waiting to be filled. All these years, Victoria breathes, they weren't looking for a 13th family member. They were searching for a new doll maker. The luminous web contracts slightly, tendrils reaching toward each of us in silent question. Thomas Jr. extends his increasingly human hand toward me while gesturing to my notebook with the other. Someone must record, he says simply. Someone must remember. Someone must maintain the connections. The miniature Winthrop house begins to fade as the family within turns toward some unseen horizon. Whether they're finally finding peace or simply changing states of existence remains unclear, but their departure creates a vacuum we can all feel pulling at something essential within us. The decision crystallizes in this moment of impossible choice. Someone must remain behind, a chronicler at the boundary between worlds. My hand trembles as I reach toward Thomas Jr., not with fear but with a profound understanding that some thresholds once crossed allow no return. I'll record their story, I hear myself say, though the voice seems to come from somewhere outside my body. The others react with alarm. Dr. Shepard grips my arm, her scientific skepticism giving way to genuine concern. You don't understand what you're agreeing to, but I do understand. The amber threads respond to my decision, weaving themselves through my notebook, transforming ordinary paper and ink into something luminous. Each page begins to fill with text I never wrote, accounts spanning over a century, names of every person who encountered the Winthrop dolls, each small donation they unwittingly provided. The anchor doesn't imprison us, Thomas Jr. explains, his form now almost entirely human, save for the fine porcelain seam visible along his hairline. It acknowledges us. Without someone to remember, we would truly die. Professor Vasquez steps between us, her expression grave. There's something you're not telling us. The toll on the anchor. What happens to them? Thomas Jr.'s gaze drops. They share our liminal state. Not fully here, not fully gone. They'll walk between, seeing both worlds but belonging completely to neither. The implications sink in. A half-existence perceiving both the living world and whatever lies beyond, unable to fully participate in either. A witness eternally observing but never truly part of what unfolds before them. Victoria suddenly gasps, pointing to the floor where the wooden figure's ashes have begun forming a perfect likeness of Ferenc Kovac. The doll-maker's features emerge in ash and amber light, his expression one of weary acceptance. He knew, she whispers. He made himself the anchor willingly. The truth clicks into place. Ferenc never abandoned the Winthrops. He bound himself to them, maintaining their connections to both worlds for over a century, slowly fragmenting his own essence in the process until only the crude wooden figure remained. Detective Mercer, examining the forming ash portrait, notices something we missed. Look at his eyes. They're focusing on something specific. Following her gaze, I see what Ferenc's ash likeness stares at so intently. The spiral pattern itself, not the center, but a specific point along its outward curve where 13 notches are carved into the floorboards. 12 small, 1 larger. It's a calendar, Professor Vasquez realizes. The binding wasn't meant to be permanent. It was designed to last exactly 100 years. Outside, the luminous figures begin moving in perfect unison, walking slowly away from the mill along their separate paths. The Winthrop family, still visible through the fading boundary between worlds, joins hands in their ethereal home, looking back one final time before turning away. They don't need an anchor anymore, Thomas Jr. says, his form growing increasingly transparent as he joins the procession. Ferenc fulfilled his promise. 100 years of connection was enough. The notebook in my hands pulses with a final surge of amber light before settling into ordinary paper again, though now filled with a complete record that only I can read. The amber light in the mill dims gradually, as if the world itself is exhaling after holding its breath for a century. What remains is no longer the decrepit structure we entered, but something cleansed by passage. Dust settled, air clearer. Through the windows we watch the procession of figures diminish into pinpricks of light against the darkened forest before disappearing entirely. The notebook in my hands has transformed. Though physically unchanged, its contents now chronicle not only the Winthrop family's journey but also every life their dolls touched across 10 decades. Names, dates, small donations collected, hair, nail clippings, drops of blood, all meticulously recorded in handwriting that shifts between Ferentz's precise script and Elizabeth's childish scrawl. "It's over," Detective Mercer says, her voice hollow with exhaustion. But Dr. Shepard, examining the floor where the ash portrait had been, shakes her head. Not entirely. She points to 13 small objects arranged where Ferentz's likeness had formed. 12 tiny porcelain hands, no larger than thimbles, and one wooden carving knife, its handle worn smooth by decades of use. Professor Vasquez carefully photographs each object before allowing Victoria to collect them in specimen bags. "These are what anchored them to our world," she explains, physical remnants of the binding ritual. As Victoria seals the final bag, her hands suddenly tremble. "There's something still here," she whispers. "Something watching." We fall silent, straining to detect any presence remaining in the mill. Nothing moves, yet the sensation of being observed intensifies. I open the notebook again, flipping to its final pages where new text appears even as I watch. Not about the Winthrops, but about us. 5 came seeking truth, the flowing script reads. 5 witnessed the completion. 5 must now decide what truth to tell. The implications are clear. Whatever record we create of this night will determine how the story continues, or ends. "We have responsibilities as researchers," Dr. Shepard begins, but Detective Mercer interrupts. "We have responsibilities as protectors," she counters. "Imagine what would happen if knowledge of this binding ritual spread." The debate continues as we gather our equipment, each arguing for disclosure or discretion. Only I remain silent, understanding that my role has already been determined. The notebook pulses warmly against my chest where I've tucked it inside my jacket. As we exit the mill, I glance back one final time. For just a moment, I glimpse Ferenc Kovac standing in the doorway, his eyes meeting mine with silent understanding before he too fades away. The burden of chronicler has passed from him to me, not as an eternal sentence, but as a temporary guardianship. In the parking area where our vehicles wait, we discover 13 small bouquets of forget-me-nots arranged on our windshields, their blue petals luminous in the moonlight. Beneath each bouquet lies a single photograph, modern digital prints of our own childhood homes, taken recently but from angles impossible for human photographers to achieve. The Winthrop collection is gone, but their story continues, and someone, or something, wants to ensure we understand that some connections, once formed, are never truly broken. The mill has been silent for a week now, our team dispersed with awkward handshakes and promises to be in touch soon. Promises we all recognized as hollow even as we spoke them. Dr. Shepard returned to her laboratory, Professor Vasquez to her university office. Victoria and Detective Mercer both requested immediate leave from their respective positions. I alone remained in Vermont, unable to tear myself away from what happened. The notebook never leaves my side. Each morning I wake to find new additions, not about the Winthrops anymore, but about the lives they touched. The connections spread outward like ripples in still water, revealing how even brief encounters altered the course of countless lives. A delivery boy who brought packages to the Winthrop home later became a renowned physician, his career choice sparked by witnessing Thomas Winthrop's failed attempts to save his family. A young maid who fled when the illness began went on to establish a successful orphanage in New Hampshire. Threads of influence, invisible until now, recorded in meticulous detail. Yesterday, I returned to the mill alone. The building stands unchanged, yet transformed, no longer oppressive, but quietly dignified, like a monument to something significant but concluded. Inside, 13 shallow indentations remain in the floor, now filled with soil that supports 13 seedlings, each just beginning to unfurl delicate leaves toward the light streaming through broken windows. I recorded this development in the notebook, my handwriting intermingling with Ferentz's and Elizabeth's as if in conversation across time. Within minutes, a response formed beneath my entry. Growth follows completion. Watch them carefully. This morning I discovered what the seedlings represent. The County Historical Society's archives yielded a photograph I'd overlooked before. Ferenc Kovac standing beside 13 identical trees he planted on the Winthrop property in 1913. The caption notes his insistence that each family member choose a tree that would grow as they grew, connecting earth to sky. The trees were cut down following the family's deaths, their wood used to craft the cedar chest that held the dolls for a century. The cycle begins anew. More troubling are the reports crossing Detective Mercer's desk, forwarded to me despite her official leave of absence. 3 separate accounts of missing personal items from households along the forest path where the dolls departed. Nothing valuable taken. A child's hairbrush, a handkerchief, a family recipe book. In each case, something small was left in exchange. A perfectly crafted miniature chair, a thimble-sized teacup, a postage stamp-sized painting of the home's exterior. The binding ritual may have completed its century-long cycle, but something new has begun. Ferentz's notes in the notebook grow increasingly urgent. Connection without consumption, teaching them restraint. The hunger can be managed if satisfied in small measures. I understand now that we witnessed not an ending but a transformation. The Winthrops have moved beyond, but their influence persists, learning, adapting, seeking balance between worlds. The dolls served their purpose as vessels for a century. What new forms might now carry their essence? Tonight, I'll return to the mill one last time before leaving Vermont. The seedlings require measuring, photographing, documenting. The notebook grows warmer against my chest as I write these intentions, as if approving this final act of witnessing before the next phase begins. The seedlings have grown at an impossible rate. In just 3 weeks, they've reached nearly 3 feet tall, their slender trunks already showing distinctive patterns that match the porcelain textures of the dolls they seem to have replaced. I've documented each one meticulously, noting how the one representing Elizabeth develops heart-shaped leaves while Thomas Jr.'s branches reach horizontally before curving upward, mimicking the arms of a child seeking embrace. Local botanists are baffled. When I convinced Dr. Morris from the State University to examine them, he left muttering about undocumented species and genetic anomalies. His soil samples revealed nothing unusual except trace elements of what he called amber crystalline structures, the same mysterious substance found in the doll's hair follicles. The notebook continues its silent conversation with me, Ferentz's handwriting now dominating the pages. Trees were the original vessels, he wrote yesterday. Before porcelain, before wood carvings, before cloth dolls, the ancients used living things as anchors. They understood that life contains life best. More disturbing are the new reports filtering through Detective Mercer's unofficial channels. Children from 3 counties have begun reporting tree friends who whisper to them during outdoor play. They return home with small wooden tokens, tiny carvings of animals, houses, people, that appear to grow naturally from branch segments rather than being manufactured. Parents report finding their children sleepwalking toward the forest at precisely 13 minutes past midnight, always turning back at their property boundaries as if meeting an invisible barrier. Upon waking, the children recall vivid dreams of having tea with the nice tree family. Professor Vasquez finally returned my calls yesterday, her voice tense with barely controlled excitement. The binding ritual wasn't Ferentz's creation, she explained. I've traced it back to pre-agricultural societies that practiced tree veneration. They believed consciousness could transfer between forms, human to tree to object and back again, completing cycles of existence. The implications chill me. We thought the Winthrops were trapped, but perhaps they were merely transitioning through a necessary stage, from human to doll to tree, each phase requiring exactly 100 years to complete. Most concerning was yesterday's discovery at the mill. The 13th seedling, Ferentz's, has developed differently from the others. While they grow straight and true, his twists upon itself, its trunk forming a perfect spiral that mimics the pattern on the floor. At its base, tiny wooden dolls continually form and dissolve back into the root system, as if the tree itself is trying to determine its final form. A small girl from the nearest town went missing for 6 hours last Tuesday. When found, she was sitting beneath Ferentz's tree, weaving crowns from fallen twigs. "The tree man is teaching me to make dollies," she told her frantic parents. "He says everyone needs something to love them back, but we have to be careful not to love too hard." The notebook's pages filled with a single sentence when I recorded this event. The cycle adapts, but hunger remains hunger, regardless of the vessel. I've decided to stay in Vermont indefinitely. Whatever is happening requires a chronicler, someone to document the transition as it unfolds. The Winthrop trees are merely beginning their century-long phase. I only hope Ferentz's teachings about restraint have taken root along with his essence. The whispering has begun. 3 nights ago, after documenting the unusual bark patterns forming on the Winthrop trees, I returned to my rented cottage to find every window open despite the autumn chill. Nothing was disturbed inside, yet something felt fundamentally altered, as if the boundary between inside and outside had been deliberately weakened. That night, lying awake at 3:13 exactly, I heard it, a chorus of barely audible voices carried on the wind from the direction of the mill, not speaking English or any recognizable language, but communicating nonetheless in rustles, creaks, and sighs that somehow formed coherent thoughts directly in my mind. They were teaching. The adult Winthrop trees were instructing their saplings, Elizabeth and Thomas Jr. particularly vocal, about the nature of connections, how to extend roots towards specific homes without being detected, how to release pollen that induces dreams without triggering allergic reactions, how to harvest small donations without causing harm. I've started recording these whispered lessons, though conventional equipment captures nothing but white noise. Only when played through headphones while touching the notebook do the voices become clear, Ferentz's deep timbre often interrupting the others with cautions and limitations. The hunger is perpetual, he tells them, but starvation is not the only alternative to gluttony. Yesterday morning, I discovered 13 strands of my own hair woven into a small nest outside my bedroom window, containing a perfectly formed acorn cup holding exactly 3 drops of morning dew. The notebook explained when I wrote about this finding. An exchange freely given, not taken. Progress. The town's children have begun creating crude dolls from twigs and leaves, leaving them on doorsteps throughout the community. Parents dismiss this as harmless play, but I've documented 47 such dolls, each bearing uncanny resemblance to residents who reported unsettling dreams the night before their doll appeared. Most disturbing was Ms. Eleanor Winters, the elderly librarian who showed me historical records about the mill. She received a twig doll last Wednesday and suffered what doctors called a mild stroke hours later. Upon regaining consciousness, she spoke for several minutes in what witnesses described as multiple children's voices, before reverting to her normal speech patterns, with no memory of the event. The trees are learning to reach farther, communicate more widely, influence more subtly. Ferentz's warnings seem to moderate their hunger, but for how long? The notebook fills with increasingly complex diagrams, root systems mapping to town water supplies, pollen dispersal patterns aligned with school bus routes, growth formations that create acoustic channels directing whispers towards specific buildings. I fear we misunderstood entirely. The Winthrop binding wasn't concluding, it was evolving. Ferentz didn't end their hunger, he merely taught them patience. After a century confined to porcelain, they've embraced a form with infinitely greater reach and longevity. And I, their dutiful chronicler, can only watch as their influence spreads through soil, air, and water. One small town gradually becoming entwined with 13 entities learning to harvest in ways no one would notice until it's far too late. The trees have become my constant companions. Their whispers fill my dreams, and their subtle manipulations of the town continue with growing sophistication. What began as simple exchanges, a strand of hair for morning dew, has evolved into complex arrangements I've begun mapping in the notebook's margins. 3 families on Maple Street now leave their windows open regardless of weather, unconsciously providing access to the pollen that drifts from the mill each night at precisely 13 minutes past midnight. The elementary school's curriculum mysteriously added a Forest Friends program, where children create nature journals, recording their dreams, unwittingly documenting the tree's communications for Ferentz's review. Most concerning is the town council's unanimous approval to replant the historic Heritage Grove, using saplings donated by an anonymous benefactor. I watched in silent horror as 13 young trees, offshoots from the mill specimens, were ceremonially placed around the town square last Sunday, their locations forming a perfect mirror of the original Winthrop property layout. Detective Mercer returned yesterday, her leave of absence apparently forgotten by her superiors who have no record of approving it. Her eyes held the vacant look I've come to recognize in those most deeply influenced by the whispers. "I've been thinking about what happened at the mill," she said, her voice oddly melodic. "Perhaps we overreacted. Trees are natural, beneficial. They clean our air, they provide shade, they remember." That last word hung between us, charged with meaning beyond its simple definition. "They remember what, Detective?" I asked carefully. She smiled, fingering a small wooden pendant around her neck. A perfect miniature of Elizabeth Winthrop's face carved into a maple seed. Everything, everyone. They're just making sure we don't forget. I've begun noticing similar pendants throughout town. Tiny wooden faces hanging from necklaces, attached to key rings, dangling from rearview mirrors. Each resident wearing one speaks with the same melodic cadence, their conversations peppered with unusual plural pronouns. We think the weather will improve. We remember when this street was first paved. We require more sunlight in the western quadrant. The notebook warns me against direct intervention. Ferentz's latest writings emphasize observation over action. The cycle cannot be broken, only guided. Resistance creates hunger. Hunger creates consumption. Only by channeling their needs toward sustainable exchanges can balance be maintained. Yet I wonder if Ferentz himself has been compromised. His handwriting grows increasingly similar to the elegant loops and swirls of Marianne Winthrop's script. His cautions seem weaker, his restrictions fewer. Tonight marks the first full moon since the Heritage Grove planting. The notebook predicts culmination of initial rooting phase and community integration milestone. Whatever that means, I'll be watching from the church bell tower, which offers views of both the mill and town square. I've left this record with instructions for it to be delivered to Professor Vasquez should I fail to return by morning. The whispering grows louder each night, and I find myself increasingly drawn toward the trees, my hand often reaching unconsciously for fallen leaves or twigs. I fear the chronicler may be becoming part of the chronicle itself. The church bell tower proved a dangerous vantage point. Last night, as moonlight illuminated the town square, the Heritage Grove trees extended their branches in perfect synchronization, creating intricate shadow patterns across the cobblestones. Townspeople emerged from their homes in night clothes, walking with that same fluid, dreamlike gait I'd observed in Detective Mercer. They gathered in concentric circles around the saplings, their wooden pendants glowing with soft amber light. From my hiding place, I watched Ferentz's sapling at the center develop pronounced ridges along its trunk, ridges that formed a crude approximation of a human face. As the townspeople began a low melodic humming, the face became more defined until it unmistakably resembled Ferentz himself, though rendered in bark and sap rather than flesh and blood. The chronicler observes. The face spoke, its voice carrying clearly despite being merely ripples in wood. Come closer. Your role extends beyond mere recording. I resisted the pull, clutching the bell tower's railing as an overwhelming urge to join the gathering below washed over me. The notebook in my pocket grew warm, then hot against my chest, its pages rustling without wind. When I finally managed to return to my cottage, I found 13 perfectly formed leaves pressed between the notebook's pages, each bearing microscopic writing in 13 different hands. The message, when assembled, was clear. The binding expands. New vessels required. You have been chosen to select them. This morning, 7 families reported missing children, all between 8 and 13 years old, all participants in the Forest Friends program. The search parties combed the woods in the wrong direction, away from the mill where I discovered 7 small beds made from twigs and moss arranged around Ferentz's tree. The children sleep peacefully, their breathing synchronized with the gentle swaying of branches above them. Beside each child lies a half-carved piece of wood, gradually taking the shape of dolls that bear striking resemblances to the sleepers themselves. Ferentz's tree has split partially down its center, creating a small hollow space where a crude work table holds carving tools sized for a child's hand. The notebook provides unwanted clarity. The Winthrop cycle requires new craftspeople. Ferentz taught Elizabeth. Now the trees seek new apprentices to create the next generation of vessels. I've begun marking boundary lines around the mill property with salt and iron filings, old protections mentioned in the margins of Ferentz's earliest notes. Whether they will contain whatever is happening or merely irritate entities that have evolved beyond such limitations remains unclear. Most troubling is my growing suspicion that I was never meant to be merely a chronicler. The first pages of the notebook now show my name written 13 times in 13 different hands, each iteration slightly altered until the final one reads not as my name at all, but as Keeper of Vessels. The town's transformation accelerates. Water from the municipal supply carries microscopic amber particles. The library's historical section has been quietly reorganized, the Winthrop family history now occupying central shelves, while books on binding rituals from various cultures have been placed in prominent displays. The town prepares, though for what exactly I fear to imagine. The mill whispers my name at night, no longer content with my documentation. I've begun finding carved wooden replicas of my childhood possessions. A baseball mitt I lost when I was 10, my first camera, even the small stuffed rabbit that disappeared during a family move, placed precisely where I'll discover them during my daily routine. Each carving bears the distinctive tool marks of different hands, as though all 13 Winthrops contributed to their creation. Professor Vasquez finally responded to my urgent messages, though not as I'd hoped. Her voicemail consisted of 63 seconds of rustling leaves punctuated by childlike giggles. When I traced the call, it originated from her university office, where colleagues report she's been deeply engaged in dendrochronology research, despite having no prior interest in tree ring dating. The missing children returned home yesterday morning with no memory of their 3-day absence. Their parents, wearing fresh wooden pendants, accepted this without question. Each child now carries a small carving knife, crafted from the same maple as Ferentz's tree. They speak of forest friends, teaching them important skills for when the growing season peaks. The notebook's pages have begun rearranging themselves overnight. Entries I made in chronological order now follow thematic patterns. All mentions of hair grouped together, all references to paralysis consolidated, all descriptions of binding rituals assembled into what resembles an instruction manual. The handwriting shifts between mine and the 13 others with increasing frequency, as if we're engaging in some group editorial process I never consciously join. Most alarming was this morning's discovery in my bathroom mirror. Fine amber crystals growing along my hairline, catching light with the same peculiar luminescence as the doll's glass eyes. When I tried to brush them away, they simply shifted position, rearranging themselves into a tiny crown-like formation. The town's transformation approaches some critical threshold. Restaurant menus now feature 13 daily specials with names like Remembrance Root Soup and Binding Berry Tart. The local paper printed a special supplement on honoring our arboreal heritage, featuring photographs of townspeople standing beside specific trees, their postures eerily mimicking the trees' growth patterns. I've begun to understand why Ferentz created the wooden figure of himself all those years ago. The anchor isn't just a chronicler, it's a counterbalance, a conscious entity aware of the binding who can guide its hunger toward sustainable patterns rather than consumption. Without such guidance, the Winthrop trees would gradually absorb rather than connect, consume rather than share. The notebook's newest entry, written while I slept, outlines my role with terrifying clarity. The 13th must choose, become vessel or create vessels. The cycle requires balance between taker and taken, between hunger and restraint. Ferentz's time concludes. Yours begins. Tonight marks 1 month since our encounter at the mill. The Heritage Grove trees have grown to impossible heights, their canopies now forming an unbroken network above the town square. Beneath them, townspeople are constructing a pavilion from wood harvested from the old Winthrop property, each beam carved with spiraling patterns that match the original binding ritual's design. I fear the choice before me is no choice at all. Dawn breaks on the morning of the autumn equinox, illuminating the pavilion in the town square with amber light that filters through the impossibly tall Heritage Grove. I stand at the threshold of decision, the notebook heavy in my hands as I approach the gathering of townspeople. Their wooden pendants pulse in unison like synchronized heartbeats. The 7 children sit cross-legged around Ferentz's tree, their small hands moving with unsettling precision as they carve what appear to be miniature replicas of the mill itself. Detective Mercer stands at attention beside the pavilion entrance, her eyes reflecting fragments of amber light as she nods in solemn recognition. "You've come to choose," she says, though the voice carries echoes of Elizabeth's childish timbre. The town has transformed completely in just 30 days. Vines with heart-shaped leaves identical to Elizabeth's tree curl around lampposts and mailboxes. Window frames have been recarved to incorporate the binding spiral pattern. Even the church bell now rings 13 times at 13 minutes past each hour. Inside the pavilion, I discover what the townspeople have been building. An exact replica of the Winthrop dining room as it existed in 1914, the day the family began their transformation. 13 chairs surround the table, 12 occupied by the most thoroughly changed residents, their skin bearing the same porcelain-like sheen I first noticed along my own hairline. The 13th chair waits empty. Victoria appears from behind the replica of Marianne Winthrop's china cabinet, her transformation further advanced than anyone else's. Bark-like patterns trace her forearms, and her eyes have taken on the amber crystalline structure found in the doll's hair follicles. "We've learned restraint," she says, gesturing to the assembled townsfolk. No one taken completely, everyone contributing minimally. The perfect balance Ference sought, but couldn't maintain alone. Dr. Shepard emerges from the kitchen carrying 13 small wooden cups on a tray. "The binding requires renewal every century," she explains, her voice overlapping with Thomas Winthrop's deeper tones. "But it needn't require sacrifice if properly distributed. I understand now. The Winthrops never intended to consume their victims entirely. Ference's intervention diverted their hunger into the dolls, but the vessels proved too limiting, too isolating. The trees provide a more diffuse, sustainable form of consumption, small connections with many, rather than complete absorption of a few." The notebook's final pages fill with 13 signatures as I watch, the entire Winthrop family acknowledging a new covenant. Beside them appears a blank space clearly intended for my name, "Chronicle or Create," Professor Vasquez says, entering through the back door, her arms cradled as if holding something precious. "You must choose which role to play in the cycle." In her arms rests a cedar box containing 12 small, partially formed dolls and a 13th space waiting to be filled. The amber crystals along my hairline warm as I approach, responding to the choice that has never truly been mine to make. The transformation completes with a sudden clarity that rushes through me like sap rising in spring. I place the notebook upon the 13th chair and extend my hands toward the cedar box. The choice reveals itself not as binary, chronicle or create, but as synthesis. "Both," I whisper, understanding finally washing over me. The cycle requires both memory and renewal. The amber crystals at my hairline warm as I take up the carving tools laid beside the box. My hands move with newfound precision, guided by muscle memory that isn't mine yet somehow belongs to me. Wood shavings curl away as I begin forming the 13th doll, not in my image, but in Ference's. He wasn't just the anchor, I explain as the townspeople watch in reverent silence. He was the balance point, the one who understood that hunger without restraint consumes itself. Victoria nods, bark patterns shifting along her skin. The Winthrops sought preservation but found only suspension. Ference sought balance but achieved only temporary containment. As I carve, Professor Vasquez circles the table, placing a small bundle of belongings before each transformed resident. A child's drawing, a wedding ring, a fountain pen. Objects that anchor them to their human connections rather than severing them. "The binding works both ways," she explains, Thomas Jr.'s cadence overlaying her academic precision. "It can connect without consuming if properly maintained." The trees outside sway in perfect unison despite the windless day. Through the pavilion windows I see the mill in the distance, no longer decrepit but renewed, its structure incorporated into the forest rather than standing against it. The 13 seedlings have grown into a perfect circle around it, their branches forming a living roof over the building. I complete the carving as the equinox sun reaches its zenith. The wooden Ference gazes up with eyes that somehow capture his weary determination. I place a single strand of my own hair across his forehead, binding myself to the cycle without surrendering to it completely. A chronicler must remain independent enough to record truth, I say, understanding my role at last, but connected enough to perceive it. The townspeople drink from their wooden cups in unison. Not a potion of transformation, but simple maple sap, acknowledging their partial bond with the Winthrop essence. No one fully human anymore, yet no one completely lost. The hunger remains, Detective Mercer acknowledges, Elizabeth's voice momentarily dominant, but spread among many. It becomes merely appetite, controllable, sustainable. I take up the notebook again, its pages now infused with amber light that pulses like a heartbeat. My reflection in the polished dining table shows the crystals at my hairline arranged in a perfect circle, a crown of connection rather than consumption. I accept my role as keeper of vessels. I say finally, not to create new hungers, but to maintain the balance that allows both worlds to exist without devouring each other. The 13th doll takes its place in the cedar box. The cycle continues, but changed. Evolution rather than repetition. Connection rather than isolation. The Winthrop binding transforms from prison to bridge, sustained by small offerings freely given rather than essences forcibly taken. And I remain to chronicle its unfolding, partially transformed yet still myself, the human element in an inhuman cycle, ensuring the hunger never again consumes that which it only meant to preserve. Sleep has become the enemy, not because of dreams, but because of what happens to my journal while I'm unconscious. Each morning, I find new entries written in my hand, but not by my mind. Detailed accounts of townspeople's donations to the Heritage Grove. A child's lost tooth buried among Ference's roots. A widow's wedding ring hanging from a branch above Elizabeth's sapling. My own contributions recorded in third person, as if observed by someone else. The balance I thought we'd achieved was merely another form of consumption. Yesterday, while organizing the town's Arbor Day celebration, I discovered the truth hidden in plain sight. The children were creating a timeline of the town's history, pinning photographs to a great oak's rings. In their innocent arrangement, the pattern became clear. Every 50 years, exactly half the binding cycle, a renewal occurred. Town records showed population drops of precisely 13 people, followed by 13 new arrivals within months. The Winthrop hunger never changed. It merely became patient. I confronted Ference's tree at midnight, placing my hand against its bark as amber crystals spread further across my temples. The wood parted like water, revealing a hollow containing 13 journals identical to mine, each chronicling a different 50-year period, each written by someone who believed themselves to be maintaining balance, each ending with the same realization I now faced. We weren't the first keepers. We were simply the latest harvest, cultivated over decades rather than consumed at once. The true binding was never between the Winthrops and their vessels, but between Ference and the ritual itself. His wooden figure wasn't an anchor but a warning, one that each new chronicler misinterpreted as invitation. The cycle doesn't require 13 to complete, it requires 13 to sustain. This morning I found Detective Mercer examining the oldest journal, her fingers tracing words written in 1914. Ference tried to stop it, she said, Elizabeth's voice now completely subsumed by something older. He discovered the ritual in the Carpathians not to preserve families, but to contain something that had already consumed 17 villages. The trees don't want connection. They never did. What lives within them is far older than the Winthrops, who were merely its most recent vessels before Ference attempted containment through his dolls. I understand now why my notebook pulses like a heartbeat. It isn't recording the cycle, it's becoming part of it. Each word I write feeds something that has waited centuries for this moment when the 13 trees, 13 townsfolk, and 13 journals align perfectly at the culmination of 2 complete cycles. The Winthrops weren't the beginning of this story. They were simply the most recent chapter before our own. And Ference wasn't fighting to maintain balance. He was desperately trying to warn us about what happens when the binding completes its true purpose. Tonight is the 100th anniversary of Elizabeth's 8th birthday. The Heritage Grove awaits its final transformation. A distant rumble awakens me at precisely 13 minutes past 3. Through my window, I see the Heritage Grove pulsing with amber light that stretches skyward in 13 perfect columns. The notebook beside my bed has completely transformed, its pages now thin sheets of amber crystal, the writing visible only when light passes through them at specific angles. The truth burns through my consciousness with terrible clarity. Ference's actual ritual wasn't binding, but containment, a desperate attempt to trap something ancient that had been consuming entire villages for centuries before finding the Winthrops. The dolls weren't vessels for the family, but prisons for 13 fragments of a single entity that the doll maker recognized from old country legends. I dress hastily and race toward the town square where townspeople gather in sleepwalking procession. Victoria stands before Ference's tree, her transformation nearly complete, bark-like skin, fingers elongated into branch-like appendages, eyes glowing with the same amber light that pulses through the Heritage Grove. They misunderstood, she says, seeing me approach. The hunger doesn't come from the Winthrops. It merely wore them for a time, as it wore the villagers before them, as it wears us now. The pavilion has transformed overnight. What was a replica of the Winthrop dining room now reveals its true form, a ritual space far older than the 19th century, with 13 stone chairs replacing wooden ones, arranged around a central pit that descends into darkness. Carved into each chair are symbols that predate written language, the same patterns Ference incorporated into the doll's clothing, hoping they would contain rather than conduct. Detective Mercer blocks my path to the pavilion, her movements jerky as though controlled by invisible strings. Ference failed because he worked alone, she says, voice no longer carrying Elizabeth's childish timbre, but something ancient and hungry. He thought 13 separate vessels would prevent reunion. He didn't understand that separation merely increases hunger. The 7 children sit cross-legged around the central pit, their carving tools reshaping the miniature mill replicas into something else entirely. Small figurines that resemble neither dolls nor trees but something in between, with too many limbs and faces on all sides. Professor Vasquez emerges from the pavilion carrying all 13 journals stacked precisely, their amber pages glowing brighter as she places them at the pit's edge. "The chronicle completes tonight," she says. 2 cycles of containment end. The true awakening begins. I understand now with horrifying clarity. Ferenc didn't create a binding ritual. He interrupted one already millennia old, desperately improvising containment when he recognized what the Winthrops had unknowingly summoned through their obsession with preservation. The dolls, the trees, the transformation of the town, all merely preparatory stages for something that has waited 200 years to complete what was started in a Carpathian village long since erased from maps. The notebook in my pocket burns against my chest as the ground beneath the heritage grove begins to shift and separate, revealing something vast and hungry stirring in the darkness below. The ground beneath the pavilion continues to separate, revealing a pulsing network of amber-colored roots that intertwine like veins through the earth. As townspeople arrange themselves around the 13 stone chairs, I clutch Ferenc's wooden figure in one hand and the crystalline notebook in the other, finally understanding my true purpose. The photograph that started this investigation, the one showing Elizabeth's dolls with their human hair, begins to materialize in multiple places simultaneously. Copies appear in each transformed resident's hands, the image changing as they gaze upon it. No longer showing dolls arranged on Elizabeth's bed, it now reveals 13 villages across centuries, each with 13 vessels prepared for the same ancient hunger. The photograph was never documentation, I realize aloud. It was a blueprint, a visual binding that connected past consumptions to future feasts. With sudden clarity, I understand why Ferenc preserved the image and ensured it would eventually be found. The photograph isn't just evidence, it's a component of the ritual itself, a visual anchor that maintains the pattern across time. Without it, the binding weakens. As amber light intensifies around us, I make my decision. Rushing forward past Detective Mercer's outstretched arms, I cast Ferenc's wooden figure directly into the pit, while simultaneously pressing the photograph against the crystalline pages of my notebook. The amber material reacts instantly, liquefying and absorbing the image into itself. "Ferenc wasn't trying to maintain the binding," I shout to the assembled townspeople as the ground trembles beneath us. "He was creating a weakness, a deliberate flaw in the pattern that could one day break it entirely." The Heritage Grove trees convulse as their roots begin retracting from the earth, pulling away from the houses they've infiltrated. Victoria's transformation reverses, bark-like patterns receding as she collapses to her knees. The 7 children drop their carving tools, looking around in confusion as awareness returns to their eyes. The pavilion stones crack along the binding spiral pattern, the fractures glowing with intense white light that counters the amber radiance. Professor Vasquez watches in astonishment as the 13 journals begin to separate, their crystalline pages returning to ordinary paper. "He embedded the counter-ritual within the binding itself," she whispers, academic clarity returning to her voice. Ferenc created the appearance of participation while actually establishing a termination mechanism that would activate when all components aligned perfectly. The pit begins to close, not gradually, but with violent force, as though something below is being compelled back into confinement. The distant rumbling intensifies, then abruptly silences as the ground seals itself completely. Detective Mercer stands blinking in the sudden quiet, the wooden pendant around her neck crumbling to dust. "What happened?" she asks, her voice entirely her own again. The photograph, now merged with the notebook, has transformed once more. As I open the pages, the final image shows not the Winthrop dolls or the consumed villages, but Ferenc Kovac standing beside 13 small saplings, his expression not of defeat, but of patient determination. A man who planted the seeds of salvation within the very mechanism of destruction, knowing it would take exactly 200 years to bear fruit. The amber crystal notebook rests on my desk at home, its transformation neither advancing nor receding in the 3 months since the failed awakening. The town has largely returned to normal, though residents still occasionally pause near the now ordinary saplings in the square. momentarily lost in thought before continuing their day with slight confusion. I've spent weeks transcribing Ferentz's counter-ritual from fragments hidden throughout the 13 journals. His brilliance becomes more apparent with each discovery. How he encoded the termination mechanism within the very structure meant to sustain the ancient hunger, creating a self-destructing prison rather than a sustainable vessel. Professor Vasquez visits regularly, her academic rigor restored as we document everything for a secret archive housed in 13 separate universities. Ferentz knew destruction wasn't enough. She explained yesterday while organizing our findings. The hunger can never be completely eliminated, only contained and gradually diminished through intentional forgetting. The most challenging aspect of our work involves the 7 children who served as carvers. Though apparently normal now, they still occasionally produce intricate wooden figures in their sleep, each carving slightly less detailed than the previous one, as if some influence is slowly fading from their muscle memory. Detective Mercer has taken a position with the County Historical Society, meticulously removing all references to the Winthrop binding ritual from public records. Not to hide the truth, she told me, but to starve what feeds on remembrance. Most encouraging is the mill itself. The 13 trees surrounding it have reverted to ordinary maples, their growth rate slowed to natural progression. The structure stands empty but not abandoned, serving now as a monument to containment rather than consumption. Victoria monitors it monthly, documenting the gradual dissolution of amber crystalline structures in the soil. I still wear a small wooden pendant, not the controlling token that once adorned the townspeople, but a different design Ferentz carved and hid within the cedar chest's false bottom. Under magnification, it reveals microscopic instructions for maintaining vigilance against future awakening attempts. The hunger remains dormant, not dead. Last week, while organizing the final documentation, I discovered a letter addressed to me personally, hidden within the binding of the oldest journal. The handwriting matches Ferentz's earliest entries, yet impossibly dates from 1914, long before my birth. To the chronicler who broke the cycle. You wonder why I didn't simply destroy what I found within the Winthrops. The answer lies in the nature of such ancient hungers. They cannot be eliminated, only redirected. What you helped contain has existed since before human consciousness. It will wait. It will adapt. It will eventually find new vessels unless properly remembered by those who maintain the boundary. Your work does not end with containment. The new cycle requires remembrance without reverence, knowledge without worship. Document everything, then hide it where only the worthy might find it when needed again. The letter ends with a postscript that chills me even as it confirms my purpose. Watch for amber dreams. They always begin with a collection that seems innocuous until examined closely. The final photograph lies before me, transformed through understanding, yet unchanged in its physical reality. The dolls still stare with their glass eyes, their human hair wigs still catch the light with unnatural luster. But now I see what Ferentz embedded within the image itself, subtle imperfections in the arrangement, dolls positioned to form the counter-ritual's pattern rather than the binding's spiral. I've donated the cedar chest to a museum under strict conditions. It remains sealed, displayed behind glass, its contents described in deliberately vague terms that satisfy curiosity without inviting investigation. The dolls themselves, recovered from various locations throughout Vermont, have been separated and sealed in 13 different containers, each lined with materials specified in Ferentz's notes: silver, salt, cedar, and iron in precise proportions. The Winthrop summer home has been demolished, its foundation filled with concrete mixed with crushed amber crystals that neutralize any residual influence. In its place stands a community garden where 13 different vegetable varieties grow, none of them arranged in any pattern that could be mistaken for the binding ritual's design. Yet vigilance remains necessary. Last month, a child in western Massachusetts created a series of drawings showing tree people who whispered to her at night. Professor Vasquez and I drove 8 hours to investigate, discovering a small amber crystal buried beneath the child's window. We replaced it with ordinary quartz, and the dreams ceased within days. The hunger may sleep, but it does not die. It waits in forgotten spaces, in abandoned mills and sealed attics, in the gaps between documented history and lived experience. It feeds on remembrance, but can be starved by deliberate forgetting, the paradox Ferentz understood and encoded in his meticulous plans spanning 2 centuries. My own transformation has neither progressed nor receded. The amber crystals at my hairline remain, invisible to others but apparent when I examine my reflection closely. They serve as a reminder and a warning, connecting me to a vigilance that must continue for at least another 100 years. The final entry in my notebook, written in my hand but with Ferentz's unmistakable cadence, offers the only comfort I allow myself. The binding seeks 13, but 13 need not bind. What was joined can be separated. What was awakened can return to slumber. The cycle continues, but cycles can be broken. I place the photograph back in its acid-free folder, filing it among thousands of other images in the Shadow Frames archive. Its power neutralized, but its warning preserved. It joins other visual anchors too dangerous to destroy, yet too important to forget completely. As I lock the archive for the night, I notice a new folder on my desk, one I don't recall placing there. Inside is a sepia-toned image of 13 children standing before what appears to be an orphanage in northern Maine, circa 1953. Their hair, arranged in identical styles despite their different ages and appearances, catches the light with familiar unnatural luster. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.